Hey, welcome back to our 7 days through the book of Judges. This is day 6. We read Judges chapter 16 to 18 today. We finished off the story of Samson, and then in chapter 17 and 18 we looked at the story of a man called Micah and his idolatry. And really that story of Micah and his idolatry begins a section in the book of Judges, as we're going to see tomorrow, which is just an illustration of the abysmal spiritual state of Israel after the time of Joshua, and what the nation actually was like. And we get these two stories, one about Micah, and then tomorrow we're going to see the story about the man and his concubine. And I mean, just the complete mess Israel was in. I'm not actually going to comment on that today. I'll pick up on that tomorrow. Today I want to make a comment on the ending of the story of Samson. And I'm going to read Judges chapter 16, verses 16 and 17 to you, which describes the moment that Samson finally gives up his faith in God. Really, it's the moment he gives up his commitment to staying true to God in some way, shape, or form. There had always been this commitment to his calling that he had that he'd held on to despite all of his disobedience. So I kind of see in Samson, he was willing to compromise on so many things, and yet there was always this vestige of still holding true to God and still wanting to maintain his identity as a chosen servant of God. And to him, that was wrapped up in his hair. Now, the law of the Nazarite was a lot more than that, and he was probably wrong in thinking that his hair was the thing that made him strong. But, how does God deal with us? He deals with us because and through and on account of faith. It's faith in us that God relates to and deals with us with. And so, where was Samson's faith? How did he express his faith? He expressed his faith in God through not cutting his hair. That's why, when he finally let his hair get cut, the Lord left him. Because it was not the hair, it was the fact that was the last thing that Samson was holding on to, where between him and God he knew, this is yours, and I'm not giving it up. And then eventually he did. Now, why did he give it up? That's the question that I want to ask today. And as we're going to see, it is because he was so worn down by these women in his life, all of these foreign women that he gave himself to. He was so worn down by them that in the end, through all of their nagging and persistence, he finally just broke. That is exactly what happened to Solomon. And I can tell you that is exactly what's happened to many men. They actually give up on what they know to be right and true and good because they are just so worn down by the persistent nagging of ungodly women. Sorry, ladies, that's not to pick on you. I'm sure that the opposite is true. There's many godly women that have finally given up because of the persistence or brutality or forcefulness of an ungodly man. I don't know, but here we see this thing of a nagging wife in the life of Samson. So I'm going to read you these two verses. It came to pass, when Delilah pestered him daily with her words and pressed him so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all his heart, and said to her, No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. He told her all his heart. Now, there's two very quick points actually I want to make from this. The thing that I really thought of when I read that verse was suicide. What a terrible curse suicide is in the world, and what a horrible place someone must be to want to take their own life. And this is essentially what Samson does. He commits suicide here, because this is what led to his death shortly afterwards. And yet he didn't care. He was so emotionally ground down, so low, that he didn't care anymore. gave up his relationship with God. He gave up his commitment and his separation to God. He gave it up because of this woman's impact on him. I mean, it's quite something, eh? The impact this woman had on him. The power she had over him. And ladies, you need to be careful with the power you have over the men in your life. So I want to talk about the foolishness of emotional decisions. And obviously, suicide being one example of an emotional decision that gets taken. But this could be all the way through to something as not as serious as sending an email that you know you shouldn't send, and then the next morning you regret having sent it because you sent it in a rage. And you worded that email too strongly and you said things you shouldn't have said. We've all done that, haven't we? So the foolishness of emotional decisions. Point number 1 of 2 points. It is never worth giving up on what you know in your heart is right and wise. It is never worth it to act out of foolish, reckless emotion. Never. When you are in that moment where you are incredibly emotional and your passions have been stirred up and now you are going to act, and in your heart there's a warning bell ringing saying, do not do this, it is foolish. And that's what emotion does. It overrides, it plows through that check, that warning in your spirit. It just overrides it, and it goes and acts. That is the heart of foolishness. And it is a wise man or a wise woman, and actually a mature man or mature woman, who in that moment, and we have many moments like that in life, where our emotions are driving us to do something, and yet we have the ability to manage our own spirits and hold ourselves back. And I can tell you, when you do that 100% of the time, when the emotion has cooled, you will be grateful that you did that. Whether it's the email that you shouldn't have sent and you just leave it in your drafts, and you come back to it tomorrow and you read it and you think, goodness me, I'm glad I didn't send that, and you change it. Or if you are thinking of pulling a trigger to shoot yourself or jump off a building or take a bottle of sleeping tablets, if you can manage your own spirit in that moment, in the words of Rudyard Kipling, then you shall be a man, my son. That's the heart of maturity. I want to read you a proverb. This is Proverbs chapter 25, verse 28. The writer simply says this: whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. You know, in biblical times, it's not like that today, but in biblical times, if a city did not have walls, it was a death sentence for that city. In fact, we see it in these verses where we're reading at the end of the book of Judges, where the Danites go to this little village that has no walls, and they just slaughter the people because they had no defense. Now that's what the writer of the proverb says. If you cannot rule your own spirit, you're like that city that is just waiting to be conquered. So I want to encourage you to think about this, dwell on this, pray about this. Ask God to mature you, to give you an ability to rule your own spirit. And then the second point that I want to make on this is that even if and when, because we all do it, you do just ride over your own warning bells and you do something in emotion, even when you have done that, like in the case of Samson, know this, that in the grace of God it is never actually too late. Even for Samson, though the writer of Judges said that the Lord had left him, yes, the Lord had lifted his hand off of him and he didn't have the power of God, the strength of God anymore, and yet God hadn't completely forsaken him, because his hair started to grow again, which to me just speaks of the fact that Samson had been humbled, and his his faith and his commitment to God in his own heart and mind were tied to his hair. And so what we're seeing there is that Samson's faith and his desire to please God, having been so humbled, having his eyes taken out, was rekindled, and God was immediately there for him. When he said, God, give me my strength just one more time. And he killed more Philistines, which was his calling as a judge. He delivered Israel from more Philistines in his death than he did in his whole life. Isn't that a picture of the grace of God? It is never too late. God's providential control of all things means that he can still work all things together for your good, no matter what you've done, if you will reach out to him for help. So God bless you, and I'll see you tomorrow.